I don't like horror movies. In fact, I don't like anything horror. The sensation of being scared doesn't really appeal to me. If I had to elaborate on why, and I typically did as a teenager when friends wanted to watch scary movies, I would say I saw enough as a kid, and now they bore me. Except, that wasn't entirely true. The truth was, there was a VHS that contained a strange mixture of cartoon and live-action scenes that I watched at my grandma's house as a kid, and they horrified me. If I had to guess on the release date of the footage, I would have to say sometime from the 1920s to the 1930s. I would sometimes ask friends if they knew what I was talking about, and I would receive a glimmer of recognition and understanding in response. Who hasn't seen a creepy old black and white cartoon after all? But when I continued to explain what I remembered from that old VHS tape, the recognition would slowly disappear from their face. Even while I described it, I knew it didn't make much sense. An egg-shaped man walking down the road with his arms waving all around the sky. A swan whose neck sways back and forth to the music in the background. Then intermittent flashes of terrifying live-action footage. The audio consisted of mostly music with heavy static, except for that one moment when the screaming man came on. It was nonsensical, and similar to describing a dream that has all the importance to you, but little meaning to anyone else. People would shrug their shoulders and say they don't recall anything strange like that. Oh, was it Roger Rabbit? No, this was not Roger Rabbit. Regardless, I loved visiting my grandma when I was a kid. My mom would drop me off Saturday and come back for me on Sunday, giving me and Grandma all weekend to do fun things together. She had a garden in the backyard where she grew a lot of different fruits and vegetables, so a fair amount of our Saturday morning was spent up there. If my mom tried to get me to eat a tomato at home, I would balk, but my grandma's tomatoes were delicious and fresh off the vine. Even a 6-year-old boy could know quality when he tasted it. Then there were the mall trips, which were too exciting for a sugar-loving kid like myself. We'd go to one of those colorful candy shops, where she'd buy me a small bag of gummy worms. Then it was to the clothing store, which always made me groan and try to convince her that I never again needed a new wearable piece of fabric. But I had to go through the motions of trying on a pair of shorts here and a set of pajamas there. As the sun set, we would be back in her house. My grandma always had to go to bed early, and to keep me entertained, she would direct me to her comfy floral couch and turn on the tube TV that was on top of a tall stand. She'd go to the bookcase where she kept her VHS tapes and choose the tape that was specifically for me. This was the one with the strange footage that she had always showed me. As a child, you tend to go with the flow. I shake my head looking back at how accepting I was when she would put the TV on and stick the VHS in the VCR. She'd pat me on the head and say she's going to bed. I noticed and braced myself while also hoping that magically, this time, something else would be on the TV. She'd press play and then would leave for her bedroom. The TV flickered in its usual way, and the title card appeared, but I couldn't read the words at that age. The old-sounding music kicks in, and the egg-shaped man comes strolling down the white road, waving his spaghetti arms around. His mouth is in an O shape, and his arms reach so high up it goes past the top of the screen. In front of him walks the swan, with the neck that looks uncomfortable when it bobs and bends to the music, which sounds almost like pure static with some trumpet. I was always mesmerized at this scene, The following animation and the bad audio, something about it made you keep watching. Then the cartoon cuts out, and a real human skull fills up the TV screen. At this point, I would jump in my seat no matter how ready I was for it. The gaping eye sockets and the jaws that, like all human skulls, had a terrible expression that looked like an excited smile. The camera would pan out and slowly reveal the rest of the skeleton. There's no music now, and the only audio is the sound of static popping noises. The video starts to zoom out, and you see the entire skeletal frame on the screen. I was positive the skeleton would jump up or try to talk. It looked so alive with its jaw partially agape. At this point, I would grab my legs and look over my knees. When you're a kid, basic things seem out of reach. The entire house had its lights turned off, and getting up would mean walking into the depths of its darkness. There was no light near me, and even the thought of turning the TV off was terrifying. As though I'd upset some system or something, or someone would be angry. Plus, I don't even think I could if I tried with how high up it was on the TV stand. The screen goes back to the cartoon, the broken-necked goose and the egg-shaped man, still waving his arms around, with the poor audio recording of the horns. At this point, a dancing bow-legged skeleton appears. They move about the dimensionless white space. The nonsensical dancing goes on for minutes before the music stops, and all you can hear is the static popping sound again. All the characters look at the viewer, as though to make sure you were still watching. A deformed face appears. No longer a cartoon again. The face's lips were curled back and it was groaning on the screen. Looking back, I wonder if it was a sick man. As a child, I saw it as a zombie, its skin all decayed and missing in areas around his eyes and cheeks. The camera slowly zooms out, and it shows that it's walking towards the camera, groaning and stumbling. Now my knees are tight against my chest, and tears are making their way down my cheeks. I imagine the zombie grabbing me and rubbing its face against me. It will kill me this way, and it will take me somewhere horrible and dark, far away from everyone I know. The zombie disappears, and it's back to the cartoon. A mummy has joined in on the meaningless movements. The swan continues to sway. The egg-shaped man waves his arms. The bow-legged skeleton dances, and the mummy begins to unwrap itself. The latter rocks back and forth, while taking the bandages from around its midsection to its neck. I feel like they could see me. I was positive their pupils were watching me, and making sure I was paying attention, so I'd witness the next live-action interlude. The screaming man is covered in blood and yelling, "No, please, no," while something off the screen hits him. The camera is too close to his face to make out what is actually happening, and his scream sounds like a primal guttural sound that I've never heard from any other human. I would rock and sob freely at this point. I'd think of what I'd give to not have to watch this. I would give my favorite action figure to have Grandma wake up and interrupt this, even if only to use the bathroom, so that a light could be turned on. Anything to break up the images on the screen. The cartoon would come back and all the characters are gone save the mummy. He's hanging from a noose at the top of the screen made with his own bandages. He sways slightly, and a title card comes on that reads, "The End." After laying in the subtle light of the television static, I would eventually fall asleep on the couch. The next morning, my grandma would always ask me why I didn't make it to the guest bedroom. I'd say I fell asleep watching TV, but in actuality, I was too terrified to make the impossibly long nighttime trek to the bedroom. Sundays were spent around the house, She'd give me crayons and I'd show her what I drew. Mostly houses and stick figures of people with the occasional shark. While relaxing like this at the kitchen table, my mom would pick me up and back home we would go. I went there about once a month, and every time I went it seemed like a brand new excursion. I would think about the cartoon until she was ready to retire for the night. On one of the days when my mom went to come get me, her and Grandma ended up in the bedroom, arguing. They kept it fairly quiet, so I couldn't make out what they were saying from the kitchen. I lazily drew some fish around my shark when my mom came out in a huff and told me to say goodbye. I gave my grandma a hug, and we got into the car and drove home. Like most kids, I don't keep track of familial visits, and it took a while before I realized I hadn't seen my grandma in years. When I was a few years older, I asked my mom if she still talks to her. She looked up from the Better Homes and Garden issue that she was reading. Grandma has a lot of things going on in her life, and visits are hard for her, she told me. I could tell she did not want to talk about it. I vaguely miss her, but at the same time, it was easy to accept the reasoning that she was too busy for visits. 9-year-olds will believe most explanations. It wasn't until I was 36 that I went back there again. My grandma had died from a stroke, and I received word from my mom that I could take a walkthrough of the house to see if there was anything I wanted. I couldn't believe I would see the inside of the house again. Even as an adult, I still remembered those cartoons, but not as vividly. They seemed more like memories from a distant dream. Maybe I could find the strange VHS and see it through an adult's eyes. The thought made me oddly excited, regardless of the chill that went through my body. Even seeing that couch again would be unreal. I went there with the copied key my mom gave me and walked through the front door. Immediately, the smell of the house sent me back to all those years ago of picking tomatoes and drawing with crayons. I remembered the house being so large, but now it seemed cramped and small. I made my way through the kitchen and stopped for a moment to look at the round table and reminisce those lazy Sundays. I then went to the living room and sat down on the couch. No HD TV. The tube TV was still there. Being in this house again with the same furniture was surreal. How could so little have changed? I went to the bookshelf to try and find that tape. Above the row of a vintage hardcover encyclopedia set was a row of VHS tapes. I looked through it and found some old classics like Gone with the Wind, but couldn't find a tape that would match what I was looking for. I made sure it wasn't hidden behind any of the other tapes or books before I moved on to my grandma's bedroom. Why I thought it might be in there, I'm not sure, but I didn't want to think it was missing. I searched through the closet and some drawers. I looked under the bed, but it was just shoe boxes filled with old letters and cards. I sat on the edge of the bed and scanned around the room. I saw something that only an old lady would have. A makeup table and chair set. I sat down in it and looked through the drawers and the table. Some half-used and new makeup, but no tape. I continued to sit there and started reconciling the fact that I wouldn't find it when my shoulder rubbed up against a picture frame with pressed flowers on the wall. It was a strange place to have a picture, considering it was only 4 feet above the floor. I picked it up to look at it closer, and that's when I noticed behind it were 2 small holes in the wall. A faint light was coming out of them. It looked like someone took a long electric screwdriver and stuck it through twice. I looked through the 2 holes, and in perfect view was the floral 3-cushioned couch where I used to watch that horrifying cartoon. I sat back in the chair and thought for a moment. It's possible these holes would be seen on the other side if you were looking, but the flowery wallpaper surely camouflaged them well. I looked through the holes again and saw the couch and television, all washed in the morning light rays. Very different from how I experienced it. Staring at this scene, a realization swept over me. I began to feel very cold and didn't want to consider the idea anymore. I looked at the picture frame I had taken down. Pressed red carnations arranged in a flattened bouquet. I placed the frame down on the floor beside me. I leaned over and put my head down into my folded arms on the makeup table. I wanted to stop my train of thought, but I couldn't. No matter how hard I tried, the terrible images kept making their way to me. All I could see was a scared little boy sitting on that couch. He was wet from his own tears and hugging his knees to his chest. He was desperately hoping for Grandma to come rescue him. But deep down, he knew she never would.